Hello, everyone. Welcome to the IAPP TRU Staffing Web Conference, Evolving Jobs and Privacy, AI and Big Data's Impact on Role Redefinition. My name is Zachary Foote, Programming and Speaker Coordinator here at the IAPP, and I'll be your host for today's program. We'll be getting started with the presentation in just a minute, but before we do, a few quick program details. Participating in today's web conference will automatically provide IAPP certified privacy professionals who are the named registrants with 1 CPE credit. I also want to let you know that a recording of this program will be available in your My IAPP portal, located under My Purchases and then My Recordings within 48 hours. Now onto our program. I'd like to start by introducing you to today's moderator, Joe Jones, Research and Insights Director here at the IAPP. Joe?
Thank you so much, Zach. Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We have got a lot to discuss, a lot of consequence to your organizations, and a lot of consequence, interest, importance to you all as professionals in this incredibly exciting, developing, and growing field. I always say it's a privilege to work in the privacy profession because of how it touches, it relates to lots of other aspects of digital governance. And that's what we're going to be diving into today. What is the future of our profession, and how does that pertain to the recruitment, the retention, the skills needed, the salaries, the budgets that all relate to our growing and our increasingly important profession? I've got two phenomenal speakers on the webinar with me. Hopefully you are familiar with them in different contexts. My colleague Saz, who is the IAPP's principal researcher, and we'll come on to this in a moment, but Saz is the author and architect of our most recent report here in the IAPP on organizational digital governance. You may also be familiar with Saz from his work on privacy governance, privacy management, research issues, and of course, our annual salary survey and report, which we were just delighted to collaborate with TRU Staffing on. And that's a great segue for me to introduce Jared, the CEO and founder of TRU Staffing Partners, who we've had the great pleasure of partnering with on the salary survey and salary report. So Saz, Jared, welcome. Thanks so much for joining. Thank you all. If you are listening live, thank you for joining. If you're listening on catch up, thank you. If you are listening and you've tuned in live, please do ask questions. We have a question facility and function. You can ask questions throughout. We'll be trying to answer and address as many questions as we can throughout the webinar. We'll also have some time at the end to pick up any questions we couldn't get to during our time. So welcome all. Saz, I'm going to start with you, if that's okay. I'd love for you to preview and just give an overview of the report that we published last week. It seems so timely to the discussion we're going to have today. We'll also say it feels really timely with news that came out of the EU yesterday. We had this report, an independent report from a former Prime Minister of Italy. And one of the things that was really striking in his speech was he said that there are now over 100 tech-focused laws in the EU. There are various overlaps, gaps, tensions, conflicts, and that is really challenging for companies to address. Now, that's just the EU, big market, of course, but if you extrapolate that out globally, I'm here in the United States. We've got 19 different state privacy laws, lots of online safety, cybersecurity. It's really complex and challenging. Can you tell us what this report is and how it fits within this ecosystem?
Sure. Thank you, Joe. And it's a great starting point because that was one of the key motivators for us exploring this area further. We refer to it as the regulatory soup in our report, and it's very much that. A melting pot of different regulations, but also different organizations trying to tackle those regulations, technological differences and changes, economic challenges, political challenges, you name it, it's all in there, and it's all contributing to the what we termed as a digital kind of governance, but also digital entropy challenge that organizations are facing on a day-to-day basis. Many of us have worked in the privacy profession for a number of years, and we in fact have now data that shows that privacy professionals are evolving in their role, evolving to take on additional responsibilities in everything from AI governance through to data ethics, data governance, cybersecurity as a regulated compliance matter, and all sorts in between, depending on the type of organization they work for. So it was with this background, we thought what we would do is take a bit of a deeper dive, speak to some organizations to understand how they're tackling this issue, whether they see it as a priority, a challenge, and how their organizations are evolving to just take on this challenge. And what we found is, organizations are, taking on the challenge. They're at the start of this journey. Many of them are transforming their existing governance structures to do so. And that led us to producing this report where we've outlined some 3 models actually of digital organizational governance structures that we think organizations may fall into roughly, from kind of an analog model through to an aligned model where governance is a bit more structured, seamless, potentially kind of more automated, more data driven, and so on. But underpinning that is the idea that organizations need to tackle digital entropy. They need to be able to cohere amongst various topics and domains, everything from privacy to AI to competition to anything kind of under a very broad digital umbrella. So it's been great to work on this topic and to be able to put out a report that talks to it, and it marks the start of our kind of a journey into exploring this a lot further.
Thank you so much, Sal. So if you haven't seen it, do check it out. The IAPP's latest report on our website, Organizational Digital Governance, speaks to this confusing, complex, challenging, socio-technical, regulatory ecosystem. Privacy is a core part of that. AI governance has clearly been added. There are other domains that feature cybersecurity, content moderation, intellectual property, national security, and on and on and on. Our report documents some of those. The big question is, who is going to do this work? And how are we going to find these sort of digital governance unicorns? And if not find them, how do we create them and how do we recruit them? Jared, as no one else more expert on this than you, what are you seeing in the marketplace? I know you've done some research on this. Where can we find these people? How do we create these people? What are the sort of trends that you're seeing in the jobs market, in organizations around this growing portfolio of privacy, AI governance, and other things?
Yeah, thank you, Joe, and great to be back with you and Saz. And it's a great report for anyone that hasn't read it. Everything that Joe and Saz put out is really compelling, and I think helps guide us as a community towards whatever's next. So to answer your question, Joe, I think it's both. We're going to look, find, identify, discover, but we're also going to craft, create, evolve existing professionals into these new roles. I think the place to start is where in the hierarchy or the programmatic ecosystem from a talent perspective we will find and we will develop. And I think depending on the nature of an organization, it could be very different. The one thing that we've seen that has been very consistent across all domains and all industries is that at the top, these jobs are not being hired for right now. They are being created with people that already possess a position within an organization. And I think your report sort of validates that. What we see is a CPO, as you've stated, is no longer just a CPO. There are increasing expectations that they take on additional responsibilities. That may be ethics, that may be governance, that may be AI. Regardless of what additional responsibilities they've been taken, and according to this report, it's a pretty significant percentage. When we did a little bit of survey over the last 2 years, just in terms of what CPOs are spending their time doing, and Zach, this is a good time to go to our first slide. We uncovered some pretty compelling things. So in 2024, less than 2% of privacy jobs were for chief privacy officers. So when we look at this report and all this evolution, it is very clear that corporations are not going to market to try to acquire top-down leadership in order to drive these changes within their organizations. Not at all. They're going internally to existing employees who understand their business, who have existing relationships, and they're asking them to take on additional responsibilities. That 2% of CPO jobs are what we would call purist CPO jobs, meaning they are really chief privacy officers who are running privacy programs in the very traditional sense. Those job descriptions don't have a 57% governance and AI responsibility, not at all, or at least not as advertised, right? What else is compelling about those 2% of CPO positions are they tend to be at much smaller, less mature organizations. Most CPO jobs that we've seen advertised really since the end of 2022, but certainly since the end of 2023, have been for organizations that lack that leadership and need to now formalize something from the top down where that talent doesn't exist internally to run what we would consider a very traditional privacy program. Now, when we talk to a lot of other CPOs who already have CPO jobs, we're finding that 10 to 20% of their time was spent in 2024 trying to recruit themselves. And we're going to get to the implications of what that means in a second. Another 15 to 25% of their time was spent on AI governance. And we talked to over 100 CPOs in the Fortune 1000, and this was pretty consistent in all the conversations we had. The challenge, I think, with this, and I don't want to flash forward to the end of our conversation because I know we're going to get to this at the end. What happens to all the stuff that they were doing before, right? If we've got 20% plus 25%, that's 45% of their time on the high end is spent doing something that they weren't tasked to do in 2023 or 2022, and certainly not in 2021. Who's picking up that slack? And I think this is the big challenge with this evolution. There's a quote in your report, and I love this quote. Organizational governance has been expanding and evolving organically in response to proliferation of technology. Truer words have never been said. And now I'm going to say some more true words. Organizational governance has been expanding and evolving, but the salaries and the budgets for the people running those programs has not. In fact, it's shrunk. So there's a dissonance here in the marketplace right now between the expectation of privacy people to evolve, to grow, to change, to impact the business in ways that were different than 2 years ago, but they ain't getting paid to do that. They're getting paid the same amount of money they were a year ago. Some of them are getting paid the same amount of money they were 3 years ago. And the new jobs coming out, you'll see, they'll have a wide range of salaries. The means of those salaries for these new jobs leans very low relative to previous salaries for chief privacy officers. So the question becomes, what is that tipping point going to be in our industry? What are those triggering events going to be that will either force corporate America to reinvest in individual leadership that has a unique skill set that may be very difficult to go and solicit and find externally in the marketplace if they were to lose that talent? Or when is corporate America going to provide increased budget in order to give resources from a talent perspective to leaders who now only have half the amount of time to do the job that they did before and potentially the same amount of staff? It's a real dissonance in the marketplace. And I think from where I'm sitting, as I talk to job seekers on a daily basis, and we talk to hundreds and hundreds of privacy professionals, if not thousands, and certainly well over 100 chief privacy officers, they are struggling to get the buy-in and the budget in order to get the deputies they need or promote the deputies they need and then backfill whatever the deputies were doing, because it has a chain effect, right? The CPO doesn't have time to do something, they elevate someone else, they take on the responsibilities. Then that person has to give over other responsibilities. That person gets, and so what's left? And what we found is, particularly in privacy, much more so than cybersecurity and e-discovery or AI or governance, privacy hiring managers are turning to the job market, not to hire at the top, but to go all the way to the bottom of the ecosystem, because that's what they can afford and get the budget for, to backfill talent with more of the task-oriented, tactical, operational-oriented privacy skills necessary to run a program as people up the hierarchy are evolving and taking on new responsibilities. And that modality has largely been in contract staffing. We've seen nearly a 2 to 3 ratio of contract hires to full-time hires, meaning in favor of contract hires, over the last 9 months of 2024. There are more people getting hired on contracts in privacy than there are people getting hired in full-time jobs. And this is compounded by another element that we've been tracking pretty aggressively, which is, well, what motivates a job seeker to go to the market? And there are 2 primary motivators, but there's one that trumps them all, and that's burnout. The number 1 reason why job seekers are coming to us looking for other work is not money. It's not working remotely from home. And these are things that drove people in 21 and 22. Those were the 2 primary motivators. The 2 primary motivators now are, I'm burnt out. I can't work all these hours. I don't have the resources I need. I got to find an organization that either gets it or is going to value me, or they're saying, my organization is not being progressive. I know I'm falling behind the curve here. I'm not going to get those resources. I need to find an organization that is going to be innovative. So that push towards seeking more innovation and progression in their career, or the push towards, I simply need to go to an organization that will give me the budget because I am working way too many hours. I mean, we've just never seen that in privacy, right? That's a real turning point. We tend to see that in cyber and e-discovery and even in some other legal areas because so much of that work is done by non-in-house professionals. But 80% of the jobs in privacy are in privacy programs in a corporation somewhere in the globe versus a vendor, a software company, or a law firm. And as a result, based on macroeconomic conditions, a lot of which you very elegantly outlined in your report, have driven the budgets and the salaries down dramatically over the last 2 years.
Wow, that's really powerful. I mean, is it fair to sum that up in some ways as privacy leaders, privacy teams doing more with less, or doing more with the same and maybe feeling like less, right? 15 to 25% time spent on AI governance now. Was that the case a few years ago? I strongly suspect it was not. Saz, we got some research that we trailed in our digital governance report on this expansion in remits. I don't know if you want to share some of that, but it's just incredible. We see year-on-year budget increases, but in some cases, but they're very modest and maybe just in line with inflation for the most part. But the increase in workload, the number of laws coming online, the nature of the enforcement, consequential nature of the enforcement, consumer expectations. But Saz, we ran a survey this year, our governance survey. Some of that data we've trailed in our digital governance report, just on the extent to which privacy leaders are picking up other work. If I could come to you on that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yes, we were able to include some questions on digital governance in our governance survey this year, which was great to be able to understand how, not just privacy governance, but AI governance and more broadly, the role of a privacy professionals in general who take our survey is evolving. And what we found is that broadly, over 80% of our respondents to our survey were picking up additional responsibility, whether that be AI governance, data ethics, data governance, and so on. But when we focus specifically on chief privacy officers, 69% had acquired additional responsibility for AI governance, for data governance, data ethics, 37% for cybersecurity as a regulatory governance matter, and 20% for platform liability. So we're really starting to kind of see the role of those individuals evolving to take on additional responsibilities, but also to take on additional teams within their business and take on accountability for managing, for employment matters, and all sorts in between, for a much bigger team than they were used to. And maybe that comes with additional budget, and as budgets are added up, and the potential to find efficiencies there, but maybe not. And I think that's going to be something for those evolving roles to navigate, but also those in other organizations as they look to comparative peer organizations and benchmark what they're doing and see what's happening there. So a case to make to their boards, to start to see, this is how organization X over here is doing it. This is how they're trying to find efficiencies, improve compliance, improve the way they manage across these various interlinked domains. So we're starting to see that evolution happen, and it'll be interesting to see that over the coming years.
Thank you, Saz. We're getting a bit of feedback from those listening, and I can hear it a little bit. I think there's an echo on your sound, so we'll if you're able to look at that, that'll be great. And I'm going to come back to you, Jared. I want to drill down into what we're seeing here in a particular context. So you've done some work looking at the professional legal services and law firm context, and how, well, the extent to which AI is being used and what that might mean for recruitment, AI governance professionals and advisors. What can you share with us about that particular context? There'll be lots of people listening today that are either lawyers in private practice, or outsource or work with lawyers in private practice, or are considering a career in law and private practice. So what can you share with them?
Yeah, it's we can go to our next slide, Zach. It's sort of sad. I'm not gonna lie, it's really disappointing. And this isn't my data. This is data that came out from the ABA. So this is the American Bar Association's data. They did a massive survey and they looked at law firms. So this is outside counsel, whether they were solo practitioners, 7 to 9 attorneys. You see the scale here, right? And it goes up to all the way 500 attorneys plus in the AmLaw. What you've got in the dark blue bar are essentially lawyers saying they're either not interested or they don't know anything about AI, right? And this isn't specific to AI governance. This could be all sorts of implications of what we're calling legal AI, right? It could be legal AI for contracts. It could be legal AI for operations. It could be legal AI for certain lawyering work, whatever the case may be. I find these results to be really troubling. It essentially is telling us that at the biggest law firms in the world, you've got somewhere between 75 and 85%-ish that either are not interested or they don't know what AI should be doing in their practice. And that to me is very problematic. The reason why this is problematic is because what we're going to see happen over the next 2 years is corporations on a global level starting to put pressure on their outside counsel to adopt AI and AI governance policies, procedures, technologies, and talent in order to keep their business. So the models for law firms are going to have to change. I'll give a quick example. Let's say somebody who's normally would go to outside counsel to have a lawyer review a contract and then provide rebuttals, just decides to ingest this contract into ChatGPT, spit out some answers, and then now they've shortcut that process for themselves in order to say, okay, this is what we found. This is what doesn't look right to us. Now you go in and you fix this. They may have cut that billable hour amount of time for that outside counsel attorney in half. And so lawyers on outside counsel are going to have to reevaluate the price point at which they bill for AI expertise, meaning it should command a premium, and it's going to command a premium. And as law firms are out there looking for talent that will wield AI or provide AI solutions or provide AI legal support, whether it's operational or legal, they're going to have to say, okay, what are we charging for that? And what hours of billable time, based on a hierarchy of bill rates, are we going to lose? This notion, right? And this is what this graph sort of prophesizes, this notion that they don't have to deal. I don't need to know. I'm not interested. Will not last, because corporations will take their business elsewhere. There are going to be new models developed by outside counsel where they're going to have to figure out, how do we make more money with expertise as opposed to brute force billable hours when AI begins to proliferate in ways that take that revenue out of our coffers. And this denial, which is what this graph tells us, a denial of that eventuality in reality is going to catch up with people, right? And they're going to lose revenue. And I'm going to kind of try to tie it back to your report on the corporate governance side, which is, clearly your report signals to the community that if they don't start to think about this and consider adopting these methodologies or these workflows or these frameworks, they're going to fall behind. Well, what is fall behind? And what is the cost of fall behind? And I think we have to look at it very differently depending on what continent we live on, right? Because in Europe, there's a lot of regulation, and falling behind may lead to a regulatory enforcement that is costly. But that doesn't seem to be the case in the United States. We do not have the level of enforcement in the domestic United States that we are seeing with enforcement in other continents, particularly in Europe. And until we do, which I'm of the belief that we're not going to anytime soon, particularly based on the political climate in the United States right now, and depending on who wins our election in a few months, that could be very divergent perspectives on this exact issue. It's a problem. It's a real problem. What's the cost to corporations that don't begin to adopt these frameworks? Because the cost to law firms is clear. The cost is going to be their billable hour, and clients are not going to pay for it, but they will pay more money by the hour for expertise. So law firms have got to get out of this headspace of we're not interested or we don't know, and they need to get into the headspace of, next slide, please. 3 words that all law firms should be thinking about. First, education. Second, evangelism, and that will lead to adoption. But we're so far from adoption, right? That previous slide shows you just how far we are from adoption and outside counsel, and they are going to need to catch up quickly. Now, look, this is no surprise to anybody because this is always how law firms have been, right? They're always the outliers. They're the last to adopt technology. But unlike a lot of the other revolutions in law firm technology that I've witnessed, particularly e-discovery in the 90s and early 2000s, right? This one's going to happen a lot faster, right? Everything in our world is going to happen a lot faster now. We rebounded out of COVID a lot faster. The economy swung up and then back down a lot faster. It used to take 10 years for an economy to go from recession to peak growth. It now takes only about 24 months. And we've seen that swing in our global economy post-COVID. And now we're going to see that swing in the commoditization of industries, in the expectation that talent evolve, and the expectation that third party, whether it's counsel, vendors, software companies, you got to do it faster. And so there's a speed element to this. And that's what people should be afraid of in law firms. Now, I ask back to you guys, because I don't know that I have the perfect answer for this, because I don't think it's regulation, right? I don't think it's regulation because there's not enough enforcement in the United States. And that's where most of these companies are going to feel the pain to actually care about a regulation, is when they really get hammered in the United States. And until that happens, why adopt to some extent? What is the pressure point? What is that trigger in corporations, particularly in the United States, other than regulation, that's going to force more education, more evangelism, and more adoption that then also forces all their third parties to do the same?
Yeah, it's a great question. I just want to chime in on that, and then I want to come to a couple of questions in the chat. Our CEO, Trevor Hughes, the IPP, published an op-ed. We'll put it in the chat. And just like you're saying, Jared, he makes this argument very forcefully. We need to professionalize AI governance urgently now. And we had decades of incremental, to a greater or lesser extent, in decades of growth and maturity for the privacy profession. GDPR was a big bounce moment. There were other moments that have helped propel the privacy profession into prominence, but it took decades. We ran a survey a couple of years ago, and there were over 700,000 DPO registrations in the EU. Right. We at the IAPP have 80,000 members. Again, after the IAPP is 24 years old. we need to get to that. And we spend a lot of time speaking with policymakers, governments, regulators around the world. And when we talk about the journey of data protection and privacy, many of them react and say, we need to get to those numbers like yesterday for AI governance. But these people aren't just waiting around. You don't just go to the AI governance professional market and see them all there waiting. What we're seeing and what you're seeing is a lot of people are being tasked with this. A lot of existing privacy pros are being tasked with AI governance. The CEOs are saying, hey, look, this is a big issue. Who in the organization can I turn to? And in many cases, in fact, in a majority of cases, for many good reasons, they're tapping the privacy pro, chief privacy officer on the shoulder and saying, can you pick this up? Right, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing this similar arc, the education, evangelism, adoption approach, taking root in organizations beyond the legal professional services industry as well. I want to come to a couple of questions. I think the first one we can answer straightforwardly from Kristen. Are you required to be an attorney to lead privacy governance or privacy programs? Lots of shakes of the head. No, absolutely not. There are some incredible leaders of privacy governance, privacy programs that are not attorneys, not from a legal background. We see people from technological backgrounds, consulting background, lots of different backgrounds that are not legal. I want to open up this question for the panel. Localized trends by region, by country. I'm going to add by sector as well. We talked about law firm, but Jared, then Saz, are we seeing any localized trends worth bringing up and surfacing in this discussion?
Yeah, I would say that, the localized trends do center largely around the regulatory environments. So, for example, you're going to see a lot less hiring for people who have expertise legally in the EU AI Act in the United States than you will in Europe. There is a far greater investment in the United States for technology operational driven talent than what we tend to see in Europe. There's nearly no demand for DPOs in the United States, but that's the bulk of the demand for talent in Europe. The problem, again, with all of this is, the average salary for a DPO in Europe is 55,000 euro. I mean, I haven't placed a privacy professional in the United States at $55,000, maybe in my entire career. That's maybe half of what the mean salary is, even for somebody with only a few years of experience in the United States. So it sort of begs the question, you're going to ask your $55,000 a year people to now take on AI governance, but you're not going to pay them anymore. That's a challenging equation, right? And you're also not going to give them the budget to go get certified or go get training. You're just going to expect them to figure it out and be resourceful. And that's problematic, right? It's one thing to ask your $300,000 a year chief privacy officer to reinvent themselves if they want to stay relevant within the business. Otherwise, hey, we'll just hire your deputy and thanks for everything you did for us. But in the EU, you've got a lot of people whose privacy programs sort of centralize and focus on the DPO function as what is most mission critical to staying compliant. And the focus in Europe tends to lean towards regulatory compliance expertise. In the United States, not as much. We're seeing a much more of a bifurcation of lawyers who handle regulation and chief privacy officers who are handling operations and who are handling strategy and who are handling governance and aren't necessarily expected to get tangled up in the regulatory aspects of the job. But again, where's the budget for those people to then replace themselves or backfill themselves or half backfill themselves as they begin to take on all these new skills? And I've seen this story before, guys, right? I mean, I started my career in e-discovery in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I watched e-discovery go from the dot-com, craze where people were chasing, the next big job and switching jobs every 18 months and getting 20, 30% increases in salaries because there was such high demand and so low supply. And then the economy bottomed out in 2008. We had the Great Recession and we watched all the price points of all those services completely bottom out and commoditize. And then the talent commoditization followed. We're on the precipice of a commoditization in the privacy talent community, whether we want to admit it or not. And the reason I say that is because it's not just privacy anymore. If you're looking to move up, it's privacy and, right? You guys have got this great slide in your deck that shows you all the different titles: head of privacy and security, head of privacy and AI governance, head of AI governance, cyber and privacy. The problem with that is those new titles, based on our research, are not paying more money. They're not paying more money to do more work. And so we as a community have got to come together and say, what are we doing to advocate that we need to be rewarded financially, either in terms of budget to create more staff support or compensation for me to learn and take on new responsibilities. And the reason for that is it's not like they've got 20 years to figure this out. They got like 20 days, right? The timeline of the expectation of the evolution of talent is so truncated compared to expectations of other models and other talent evolutions that we've seen in legal technology that it's a little worrisome. And quite frankly, what we're seeing as a result is people are checking out, guys. We're seeing CPOs leave CPO jobs and take jobs that are not chief jobs for less money in order to work less hours. We are seeing chief privacy officers, heads of privacy, leave full-time permanent positions and take contracts because the contract role will either pay them better or give them a better quality of life or greater flexibility, or put them in an organization where there's more of a commitment to innovation or a siloing of innovation that is separate from the responsibilities of also having to run your program on the same budget that you ran it on the year before. So what are those tipping points? And that's what I'm looking for, right? And I am of the mind that it's not regulation. It has to be tied to the business and growing revenue in the same way that the pain that AI will cause lawyers to lose their traditional billable hour will affect pricing models in law firms. That's what will get outside counsel to change. When they realize they're not going to be able to build the same tasks at the same rate, at the same volume that they were the year before, then they're going to care. And that realization is starting to come to light to a lot of lawyers. Clearly not enough, but a lot. Most of them are in-house, but those in-house lawyers don't have the ability to say my hourly rate is this, and if I bill this many hours, I'm going to make this much amount of revenue for the corporation. That's not how it works over there, right? It's a cost center, not a revenue generator. So how do we move privacy and AI governance into revenue generation? How do we tie those metrics in AI governance and those additional responsibilities to growing the business or increasing competition? Because those are the metrics that are going to get people more budget and more compensation.
And just before we move on, and I want to come on to the types of roles that we're seeing in the AI governance space. You've got a great taxonomy of those roles on our next slide. But before we get to that, lots of people listening, watching, will be in positions where they've taken on this extra role, and as you say, for no extra pay or credit. What's your advice? What are some of the arguments that you see as most persuasive to organizations when these, let's say, privacy professionals have acquired AI governance, when they want to go to their seniors, boards, CEOs and say, look, I've got this extra work, I'd like to be compensated for it. What are some of the arguments that you're seeing prove be successful?
Well, I'll be honest, I don't think there are that many right now. I think the community is really struggling with making these arguments. The ones that are able to do it and do it successfully have usually started to move their metrics, the dashboards they've created, less from a risk avoidance model perspective and more into a increased profitability or business acceleration model. Meaning, hey, look, we avoided getting this huge fine in Europe because we were compliant. You know, I was talking about this with my team in preparation for this, and I've done so many webinars where I've seen so many CPOs say fear of regulation, retaliation is not going to motivate my board, right? So what is going to motivate my board is growth, is increase in stock price. I mean, look at Facebook, look at Meta, right? Meta's stock is, I mean, maybe not after last week, but over the last couple of months, it's the highest it's ever been. Meta was trading at $88 a share in the fourth quarter of 2022 when Mark Zuckerberg laid off 10,000 people. And then the whole world followed suit thinking we were going to go into a recession, which, knock on wood, we really haven't yet. I mean, we've had a job market recession, but not really an economic recession, and certainly not a stock market recession, right? The stock market is through the roof. The NASDAQ is higher than it's ever been. The Dow is higher than it's ever been. Facebook is trading at 500 plus a share. It was at $88 2 years ago. And so this approach of regulatory fear, right? Because Meta's probably paid more fines than anybody when it comes to privacy regulatory infringements, isn't what's necessarily driving it. It's business growth. It's the quintupling of the stock price. Now, not everybody's a publicly traded company. Not everybody has that luxury of being able to point to that and say, here's how we contributed to that growth. But I think that's what leaders have to look for. How do we connect dots like that? Because that's what's going to get the attention to get more budget and to get more compensation.
Amazing. That's so helpful, and well, hopefully not dispiriting for those in those positions, because they do have options, as you say, look elsewhere, find more persuasive, empowering arguments, focus on the enabling qualities. Let's roll to the next slide, please, Zach, because Jared, you've done some work teasing out the types of roles that are emerging in the AI governance market. Of course, we're familiar with the taxonomy of privacy roles. What are you seeing in the AI governance space?
Yeah, this is not comprehensive, right? This is a sampling. And what we're trying to do is bucket things. And I've used this metaphor a few times, and hopefully everybody enjoys this. The birth of an industry is like the birth of a solar system. And a solar system often starts with a black hole sun. And a black hole sun, let's call this black hole sun AI, sucks everything towards it. And that's exactly what AI has done in the talent community over the last 2 years. It has sucked all these people towards it. AI lawyers, privacy for AI, meaning we're using technology in order to create better privacy. We're using AI to run better privacy, or we're actually making products in AI that have nothing to do with privacy and someone else will do that. Or we're trying to figure out how AI is part of our strategy for our entire business. There are all these different skill sets getting sucked in. What happens when they get sucked into the black hole sun is they form a giant planet, or they form a sun. And that's what most corporations want right now. They want one person to do all these jobs, right? Let me go hire an AI governance leader who has to do all this. The problem is there's not one person that knows how to do all of this and shouldn't be expected to do all of this. So they're sucking these people in. We're going to see more people get hired to do things that they don't know how to do yet, or be moved into roles where they don't know quite how to do it. And eventually what will happen is it will explode, like all suns eventually do. And when it does, we will see compartmentalization, commoditization, and specialization, which is exactly what happened to privacy, which is exactly what happened to cybersecurity, which is exactly what happened to e-discovery, and the same thing will happen to AI. What's important to know is as you gravitate towards this middle, is that you figure out what your specialization could be, because you can't be expected to do it all. So part of the strategy for you as an individual in this ecosystem as a job seeker is to say, where am I going to make my niche, so that when the job market matures and there is role definition, and we think this is sort of what the role definition might start to look like, is starting to look like, you'll be able to move in an area of specialization where you can be an expert, as opposed to sort of an expert, or an expert in piece. And so, just as we encourage everybody out there, yeah, it's important to have broad knowledge. Sometimes it's better to have very focused knowledge in order to have very deliberate impact, instead of spreading yourself too thin as you attempt to evolve. I don't know if that makes sense, but hopefully that metaphor.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially important to bear that in mind in this relatively early stage, where there's a lot of hype, a lot of attention and attraction to AI governance. A lot of people moving into the space, planting a flag, claiming it, not to lose sight of the fact that the real value add comes in, as you're saying, compartmentalizing, specializing, not just claiming it all. If we can, let's break down how you're seeing some of the salaries play out here at different levels, different job types, which is on the next slide.
Yeah, so
and then I want to pick up some of the questions before we conclude.
We've done a really deep analysis, and we've sort of tried to at least compartmentalize the roles into not title specific stuff, but sort of tiers, meaning an analyst being sort of the most entry level, though certainly not totally entry level. We'll call it early career, an executive being a very experienced professional. What you're seeing is the minimum salaries, and these are based on jobs posted online. And we went through thousands and thousands of jobs. I think 41,000 jobs we saw posted over the last 2 years. The max, obviously, is the most we've seen posted. But the number that I want everyone to look at, which is what's most concerning to me, is the mean, the median, right? The median leans so much further towards the minimum than it does the maximum, right? Look at an executive. The max we've seen an executive for an AI governance position posted is around $500,000. But that is not in any way the average. The average is $203,000, which I think is like $23,000 less than what when we did our report 2 years ago, said the average salary of a chief privacy officer was. So we haven't really figured out how we're going to value these skill sets relative to a competitive job market. What we're finding is this huge range of salaries because nobody knows what these people should be paid. And so they dangle some high numbers on the max end, but when people actually wind up getting these jobs, they're not getting them at this max end for the most part. I mean, there are obviously exceptions to the rule, but most people are getting hired at this mean salary, and these mean salaries are well below what we're placing privacy professionals in, separate from AI governance. So if we're expecting privacy professionals to move into AI governance, we're going to have to compensate them more if we want them to do that. Otherwise, we're going to be pulling from a pool of people that don't have the skill sets and experiences we need, and then expecting to train them on the job in order to get them. If we want these jobs to be attractive, we need the compensation to go up in order to attract people to leave one job and take another without taking a 20 to 30% pay cut. And look, we've seen people take pay cuts over the last year, particularly over the last 9 months. Now, I will say, I think we've hit the bottom. I think the bottom was July. And if you look at the US economic job report, July was definitely the bottom of the worst we've seen in terms of net new hires, non-farm payroll hires in the United States. It was the lowest it had been, I think, since like late 2020 when we were just coming out of COVID. Things have gone up dramatically in August. I think they almost doubled. And we expect, at least in our business, things are going much better in September than they were in July and August. So I do think the job market is getting better, both in terms of the volume of jobs and the compensation, but it's incremental. Part of that might not change here stateside until after the election. But again, I don't know that we're going to attract at least experienced privacy talent to move into AI governance exclusive positions if the salaries don't follow. And so we've got to figure out a way to create value around these positions that goes well above and beyond whatever the value proposition that the companies currently have in their mind is.
That's terrific. Thank you. Look, I want to come to some of the questions before we conclude. And let me pick up a few easy ones and then turn to Jared and Saz for the harder ones. Aaron, look, it's a great point and question. I'm going to say, should the IAPP and or TRU start to develop what combined AI governance and privacy role could look like? Certainly something we're thinking about a lot when it comes to our surveys, our governance survey, our salary survey, our wider research agenda. What does the combination look like? What does the delineation and the separate nature look like? What do these specific areas of expertise that Jared just outlined look like? I'm going to open up for the harder question from Joe. What skills do we think are going to command the highest premium in the next 5 years? So maybe Jared, Saz, I'll give you 3 skills each to pick that you think will be, really points of differentiation that will help those listening, the professionals in this space, say, well, this is why I'm extra special and deserving of higher salary and more elevation in the organization. Maybe start with you, Jared, and then Sam.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a lawyer, being a lawyer that understands the implications of AI as it relates to IP is really going to be a high valued legal position. We're starting to see more lawyers who have IP backgrounds move into AI because there is going to be so much litigation over the next 2 years around the use of data as it relates to training LLMs. And that is going to be a very, very hot skill set. Now, we haven't always seen people from IP move into privacy, but people in IP moving into AI are going to have to get enough privacy knowledge to be dangerous. And that's going to be a really valuable skill to have. One of the other most valuable skills to have is going to be enterprise-wide technology implementation, whether that is from a making it compliant standpoint or helping it function within the business standpoint. There is a renaissance occurring right now in the technology vertical, the likes of which I don't think we've seen for nearly 20 years since the birth of the internet, right? Which is so many tools, so many vendors, so many different third-party solutions that are unproven, untested, but potentially going to lead the way with the right level of adoption, in the same way some of the gargantuans in the privacy business have now dominated the space in terms of subscription base. So I think knowing how to institute, how to vet, right? What do I mean by that? How to interview vendors, how to interview technology partners, how to ask those right questions before purchasing and procuring products is going to be a critical skill set. And then the last thing I would say is probably going to be around risk and strategy. When you've got this many outside counsel lawyers who don't understand or are not interested in AI, being able to be persuasive and evangelize adoption and then actually get it, and then go make use cases to your boss or your board about, here's where we were, here's the arguments that were made, here's what we did, and here's where we are now, and look how much better we are because of it, or look how much more profitable we are because of it. That influencer, right? Let's call it an influencer. Influencer, tech, IP attorney, to me, those are going to be the skill sets that get the premium on compensation in the next 6 months.
Great. Thank you. Saz, over to you. Top skills, maybe 3 top skills for professionals to bear in mind as we see our profession grow, mature, and get elevated.
Yeah, sure. I think the first one, and just picking up on Jared, your last point around risk, and I was talking about it from a more of a risk management, risk skilling perspective. I think the ability to talk about risk, to measure risk, to be able to communicate that from a metric point of view, and to be able to demonstrate your value in a certain sense through that way, I think is going to be valuable. So the more you can do that within your program, the more you can mature that, the more you can demonstrate that you are adding that value. I think it adds to that business case, both from a professional organizational compliance perspective, but also from a personal kind of give me more money kind of perspective as well. So I do think there's an argument for risk there. The other kind of 2 that I want to touch upon is data governance and data ethics. I think both are key topics, and we're having this convergence through AI, but also a number of other areas, kind of bringing all of those together. And I think privacy professionals and others who kind of pick up skills across those are going to see their skill set expand and their marketability expand as well over the coming years.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So look, this is the moment where I'm going to ask you both if you've got sort of parting remarks, concluding remarks for those that have tuned in. Thank you, everyone that has tuned in live. Many more will be watching this on catch up. Our contact details are here. If you're watching live or on catch up, feel free to connect with us. Please feel free to engage with Jared and the team at TRU Staffing Partners. They do some incredible research and work helping shape the profession, helping ensure that the profession is a fluid one, where talent goes to where talent is needed. But I want to start with you, Saz, and then I'll give Jared the final word. Any final comments on what we're seeing in our space, things people should be looking forward to?
Yeah, I will pick up where I started, which is around the digital governance space. I think there's a lot of exciting work there. I'm looking forward to doing more in this area, to seeing how organizations are tackling the convergence among the various domains. It's definitely a space where the limited resources, the need to do more with less, just the sheer volume of regulatory kind of change, it's all coming together, and it's an exciting time and an area to watch. So for me, kind of a key place there.
And Jared?
I'm gonna a couple of quick thoughts. I'm gonna quote Jess Barr, who's brilliant. She's one of our senior vice presidents of recruitment and account management here at TRU, and she uses this all the time. I'm gonna steal it from her. If you're a leader in the privacy space, our advice to you is this: be patient, but be prepared, because this market is going to change on a dime. And the minute we start to see movement from people who have over the last 2 years evolved into these newly defined roles that Joe and Saz have very elegantly articulated in their report, as soon as they start getting poached, there's going to be a musical chair turntable of demand and supply chain evolution and revolution at the executive level. And we're going to see opportunities start to come quickly and in abundance for those leaders as they all start to switch jobs, which is exactly what happened during GDPR in 17 leading up to May of 18. Everybody wanted a CPO, and so it was musical chairs, except we weren't taking away any chairs. There were always chairs left. And so we're going to see that again. For everybody else, I would say this: it's never too early to get education, but curiosity is the place you have to start. Just get curious about this stuff. Find internal white knights at your organization who will be mentors for you. You got to go internally and externally for education, right? Learning the things that you'll learn at the IAPP with one of their certifications is great and valuable and necessary, but so is knowing how your internal business functions and runs, and how decisions are made and why they're made, and being able to maneuver within that bureaucracy is a skill set unto itself that becomes increasingly important the further you move up the food chain in privacy. So diplomacy, bureaucracy, curiosity, and patience are cornerstones of a successful career in privacy for the future.
Incredible. Couldn't have put it better or more poetically. Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Saz. Thank you to the TRU Staffing Partners team. Thank you to the IAPP programming team. Thank you to all that have listened and engaged. So many questions, so much engagement. We really appreciate that. Do connect with us. We'd love to carry on and begin conversations. Zach, I'm going to turn it back to you to close.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joe, and to Jared and to Saz for sharing all of your knowledge with everyone today. And again, thank you to our friends at TRU Staffing for helping to make this webinar possible. I want to encourage you to, if you haven't already, click the survey link that was put in the chat recently. This will help you give us your feedback on today's program. It also helps us improve our web conference programming and to have even better web cons in the future. That wraps up the program here today. We want to thank you all so much for joining us. We hope to see you again at another IAPP web conference very soon.